Olá, pessoal. Começa aqui o programa especial Saúde e Diagnóstico, em parceria, como você sabe, com a CBDL, Câmara Brasileira de Diagnóstico Laboratorial, que neste ano completa 3 décadas de história e certamente as primeiras 3 décadas. Hoje temos aqui o nosso presidente executivo da CBDL, Carlos Eduardo Gouveia, e a doutora Lúcia Wad, para honrosamente recebermos uma personalidade mundial da área da saúde, a doutora Rosana Pilling, que é atualmente professora e presidente de pesquisa de diagnóstico na Escola de Higiene e Medicina Tropical de Londres e diretora do Centro Internacional de Diagnóstico, o IDC. A doutora Rosana Pilling tem uma respeitada atuação mundial na área de diagnósticos laboratoriais, seja pela OMS, por onde já passou, ou em outras entidades líderes com as quais coopera ativamente para a promoção da saúde, além do Advanced Course of Diagnostics, que ela anualmente coordena em Annecy, na França, em conjunto com a Fundação Mériot, juntando, inclusive, líderes e diferentes atores da saúde para disseminar esta mensagem do valor do diagnóstico. A doutora Rosana Pilling estabeleceu ainda o International Diagnostic Center com o objetivo de acelerar o acesso a diagnósticos no mundo em desenvolvimento por meio da redução da duplicação de ensaios clínicos, agilizando a aprovação regulatória e acelerando o desenvolvimento de políticas públicas. Isso é um pouco dessa rica história da doutora Rosana Pilling. Carlos Eduardo Gouveia, como presidente executivo da CBDL, eu gostaria muito que você desse as boas-vindas, espero que esteja tudo bem contigo, para a doutora Rosana Pilling, e nos contasse como você conheceu o expressivo trabalho dela na área de diagnósticos laboratoriais e também como ocorreu a aproximação profissional entre vocês. Tudo bem, Carlos?
Tudo bem, Elias. Muito obrigado. É sempre um prazer estar aqui com você, com a Lúcia, em mais um programa especial Saúde e Diagnósticos. E nada melhor do que terminar o ano com uma grande entrevista internacional com a Rosana Pilling. Eu vou passar a falar em inglês, até para dar as boas-vindas a ela, mas já tenho certeza que será um programa fenomenal que vai bombar aí nas redes. Rosana, thanks a lot for being with us. It's with great pleasure that we have you here just after a fantastic workshop, the 11th workshop, international workshop on diagnostics that we have done together. And it's very nice to remember how it always started. I was with Rosana at a long time ago, over 10, 11 years, in Annecy, a very nice location in France, close to the Swiss border. And Rosana was holding this advanced course on diagnostics. I think it was the first or second edition, probably.
Yeah, it was the second edition.
Second edition. And she launched a challenge to the few Latin Americans that were there. Actually, it was for everyone, but we took it very seriously.
Very seriously, yes.
So basically, it was one very simple exercise to discuss what were the bottlenecks, the major problems that we saw in the region in order to register and to incorporate new diagnostics, new technologies in our countries. And we listed some, and we saw that there were many. But anyway, one point was to discuss among the countries how to harmonize, and later we realized that it was very difficult to harmonize any regulation, but that we should try at least to go for a convergence trend in terms of regulation. And Rosana said, oh, okay, it's a nice exercise, but why you don't put in practice? In the same year, this was in April, I think, in the same year, in September or October, we had our first workshop in Brazil, and she came. She came, brought many key stakeholders, key actors of the healthcare sector, and we were able to have our first workshop at PAHO in Brasilia. And since then, we had several others. The second one was at Anvisa, where we signed a letter of Brasilia, getting together academia, government, and industry all together and having the basis for what became a legal entity, non-profit, Aladiv, founded by CBDL and all the people that were there. Since then, we have been working together, not only in Latin America, that's the main scope, but globally. I have been together with Rosanna in Hong Kong, in Ghana, or no, it was in Kenya.
In Kenya.
Yeah, in London, in Canada,
around the world,
Peru, everywhere.
everywhere.
Yes.
So she became more than a friend and a very good colleague in this difficult challenge that is to take healthcare to where it's mostly needed.
Yes, and I'd like to add that, you know, it started when I first went to WHO in the early part of 2000, where I realized for the first time, you know, coming from Canada, where people have free access to diagnostics universally. I realized that at WHO, many countries have no access to diagnostics or very limited access to diagnostics, such as for screening of pregnant women for HIV and syphilis to save their babies from being stillborn or to die you know, shortly after birth, and many tropical diseases for which even industry would not pay much attention because there's no profit to be made, right? And but developing tests and manufacturing take a lot of time and effort and resources, especially funding. And so it was a very difficult moment to realize, how can we make diagnostics available but accessible financially and geographically to people around the world, especially those who need them. But in WHO, because WHO is a normative organization that convenes meetings for guidelines, they have a very distinct separation from industry. So cannot work very closely with industry because they have to set the standards and guidelines. And so they have to have independence from any commercial entity. So when I moved to the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine in 2009 to take up the chair in diagnostics research, I realized it was an opportunity for me to create the International Diagnostic Center that could provide a neutral platform for public and private sector to interact and talk about the kind of diagnostics that we need, to talk about how we could collaborate and have these public-private partnerships in order to make the diagnostics that we need and have them accessible to different countries. But I always used to say that, you know, diagnostics is very neglected part of global health. In global health, funders and governments say, oh, drugs save lives, vaccines save lives. Diagnostics, no, it depends on whether people, after they're diagnosed, whether they go for care, whether they take the right drug, or whether they stay, you know, with the compliance for the drug, like for HIV and TB, where the treatment is very long. You know, if they don't comply, then, you know, the diagnostics is for nothing, right? And so it's very hard to argue for the value of diagnostics when it's often discounted because of lack of compliance or the drugs are too expensive, etc. And so I was talking with the head of the Wellcome Trust that fund a lot of global health programs about the diagnostics being undervalued, underfunded, and neglected. And I said, you know, it's like the child of, you know, sort of like an orphan or a neglected stepchild that no one wants to pay attention to. And some of my friends would even say an ugly stepchild that nobody wants to pay attention to. And then Jeremy said, the head of the Wellcome Trust, he said, no, don't think of it that way. Think of diagnostics as the Cinderella of global health. And now with COVID, everyone knows about diagnostics. Everybody can distinguish between PCR and CPR and all these. And so I think now Cinderella has been invited to the ball, right? And so now we need to think how together we must work harder to make diagnostics a reality for most patients who need them, and even for prevention, right? You screen for prevention. And the COVID pandemic has given us even new mandates for diagnostics. If you think about diagnostics only as a diagnostic tool to detect cases, that's fine. But right now, in many countries, we're using the test to protect the vulnerable. So we screen healthcare workers, care home workers, or visitors to care homes where the elderly are very vulnerable. So it's a test to protect the vulnerable. We also use a test to release from quarantine or from self-isolation. We also have a test to enable. When we have mass gatherings, we have a test to enable the economy to recover so that we could have sports events, music events, travel, etc. And then finally, for now with the Omicron, we're concerned about schools. And so now we have a test to stay. For those who are negative can stay in the classroom, but those who are positive, should stay home and self-isolate. So the testing is now part of our lives, and testing has many, many useful ways that we can get out of the pandemic. And so I think that we are at a very exciting stage where our collaboration over the years have finally paid off. Do you think, Carlos? Do you think this is?
I am sure. I'm sure we have a really new momentum for all the work we had done in the past. It's really well perceived, the value of diagnostics for all the situations you mentioned, and especially for epidemiological control. If you see the importance of knowing exactly where is the hot zone, the red zone, that you must take a special attention from the perspective of a politician or someone who is taking care of that region in special.
Yeah, and I'd like to add that, when you mention about the dashboards that we could see where the hot zones are, etc., I think there are two really, really good advantages to that, which is we normally think of the COVID pandemic as a disaster, but I think there are two good things that came out. One is that we all have access to the same information. Every day, millions of people wake up and the first thing they go to is the dashboard to see how many new cases today, are there new restrictions today? So that has become part of people's, knowledge. And it's for the public. We used to say in public health, we tell the public what to do. But, we know now in the COVID pandemic response, that doesn't work. You don't just tell people what to do and they'll do it. It's having that knowledge, right? If the public can see where the hot zones are, they will take more care, right? And if they see the cases rising, they would take more care. So it gives the public the power, the knowledge, give them the power to try to act responsibly. And coupled with the testing, that would be, the tools that they could use to act responsibly. Then the second part of having a dashboard is that this type of data display digitizing data so that it could be displayed. It's a real advantage to big global crises like antimicrobial resistance, right? We could build the same system so that you see, oh, you know, in my part of the country, there's a lot of resistance and we need to do something about it. It gives, rather than just reading a report at the end of the year, and you find out that for the last 12 months, there's been outbreaks and things happening, but you didn't know about it because you have no access to the data. You know, that kind of real-time data that you can turn into intelligence to inform control programs is really important, not only for pandemics, but also for antimicrobial resistance, for disease trends. We have so many diseases we are looking at eliminating as a public health problem by the year 2030. And so having that kind of public display with everybody having access to the same information, and it's good information, right, accurate information, we go a long ways towards having a much better impact on global health in terms of diagnostics. And I think those are really important takeaways from the pandemic.
Yeah, this legacy, and before I pass to Lucia, this legacy of how to deal with a crisis like this, how big this kind of size and impact is going to be for us for quite a while. We know now how to deal with new pandemics that may come. We're probably going to be quicker in our response, and also probably more careful in relation to this One Health concept. Human, animal health plus environment. These three factors are interacting more and more. So if we don't pay attention to all the three, of course, we're going to have problems in the future. That's one. And second, we realize today that the system, the healthcare system as it was established, was not in conditions to comply with all the needs. Hospitals, labs, they were existing for quite a while, but if they are dealing with this kind of situation, how do you invite people that are not infected to go there to check? Of course, they were afraid they wouldn't go. And last situation, we don't have enough healthcare infrastructure in all the places. In a country like Brazil, continental size, it's a good example. So to add new facilities that are prepared to deal with this invisible people for the healthcare system, it's essential. And in our case, we dealt through the pharmacies and drugstores. We added a number of places that were not being considered before that started to provide healthcare to these people through pharmacists in good conditions and using a fantastic tool, which is the rapid test in point of care. Other countries decided for other ways. But anyway, this is going to be valid for other situations. And we are living today still other pandemics like syphilis, for instance. It's still a major problem. So we have to open our eyes and do whatever we can. Lucia, with you.
Dr. Rosana, the outbreak of COVID-19 has quickly spread worldwide, and a comprehensive strategy, including surveillance, diagnostic research, clinical treatment, and development of vaccines is urgent, needed to win the battle against the COVID-19. Even though excellent techniques are available for the diagnosis of symptomatic patients with COVID-19, we detect critical gaps that still remain in screening asymptomatic people who are in the incubation phase of the virus, as well as in determination of viral spreading during convalescence to inform decisions for ending isolation. In your opinion, we are going to the right direction in the conduction of COVID-19 pandemic situation. Now we have public and regulatory policies in order to get faster diagnostic tests to mitigate and suppress the spread.
Yes, I think in general we are moving in the right direction. The first thing is that governments actually recognize the value of diagnostics in being able to detect cases in a community so that they could interrupt that chain of transmission within the community, whether people are symptomatic or not, right? Because sometimes the chain of transmission include people, some are symptomatic and some are not. And so if you only test symptomatic people, then the chain is broken and you could no longer prevent the disease from spreading. And so that's why it's important to have pharmacies and other non-traditional healthcare facilities offer testing, and even at home. I think self-testing is very, very important. And many countries now are thinking about having self-tests, but already from very early on, from the middle of last year, already some countries like Switzerland and some places in the US already started allowing citizens to actually get free tests that they could take home and test whenever they feel they've been exposed. And so I remember in Switzerland, you could take every week, you could take 5 free tests home for your family, for yourself and your family. And the same in the United Kingdom, you could do that. And in the US, you could buy them over the counter at a pharmacy. But I think that more countries need to have that, because in a pandemic, we cannot always rely on top-down approaches, right? Top-down has limitations. And so we need the community to have the knowledge in order to act. And in order to act, one of the tools they have is testing. The other tools they have are, wearing a mask, social distancing, and also, knowing when to self-isolate and not go to work, etc. Right? And so, with increasing positive cases in some countries, they are saying, schools should now have screening of both teachers and students. And in other countries, they're saying, okay, parents maybe should test their kids twice a week so that the kids can go to school knowing that they are negative. So there are different countries have different policies, but it's not all moving. It's moving all in the same right direction, but not at the same speed.
Yes, good. And when the main lesson that we learn in this pandemic situation, COVID-19, is that we have to think in a collective, not in our country. For example, I will protect my country. No, we have to protect all of the world.
Yes. So no one is safe until everyone is safe, right?
Yes.
And so that's the big thing to take away from this pandemic. And so creating that collective responsibility is important. Yeah.
Another thing that Rosana always says is quite powerful. Without diagnostics, medicine is blind. And that's true, because diagnostic is responsible for over 70% of the clinical decisions. So the earlier and the more precise diagnostic you have in your hands, the better access to a proper therapy you're going to have. And this means less investment in the whole sector, quicker results, more precise therapies. It's really quite powerful, all this. And people didn't know how to use, and as Rosana said, diagnostic was not even considered because people didn't realize how strong it can be in our hands.
Yeah. And
Yes.
so I think also one of the technological advances made during this pandemic is more use of apps. So all the data is captured. You could access it through an app, and so we can now think about a clinician who has to interpret a test result. So we often teach the clinicians, when we teach them about diagnostics, you have to interpret the results based on your local epidemiology. For example, if you have a COVID test in a region that have very little COVID tests, is it a false positive or is it a real positive? You have to think about that. But how many clinicians actually keep up with the local epidemiology of all the infectious diseases for which we have diagnostics? Not likely, right? And so, but now with this electronic digitized data, I mean, it is possible for us to have apps that clinicians could look up how many people have been positive for typhoid in the last year in your region, etc. Right? So that allows the clinicians to make to do precision medicine, right? To be able to use these tools to have a much more precise use of medicines, and so that's something that we could look forward to as well.
Rosana, regarding studies as read of the Canadian National Laboratory of Sexually Transmitted Disease, now also called sexually transmitted infections, how was the diagnostic testing process, and what sexual diseases are of most concern these days?
Of course, for us, the most concern these days, well, besides HIV, I mean, HIV is a big problem for every country. But besides HIV, we're concerned about gonorrhea, right? We have almost run out of drugs for gonorrhea. There are many, many resistant drugs. At first, it was towards penicillin, and then it was towards ciprofloxacin, the quinolones. And now, our last resort is ceftriaxone, there's cephalosporin family of drugs, and we're seeing increased resistance to that. And also right now, the first line of drug recommended for gonorrhea is an injectable. So that means patient care is a lot more complicated, right? When the drug is instead of an oral single dose drug, which is what we had with ciprofloxacin, we now have to go to an injectable, and so it's a big concern about having a diagnostics that could, within 30 minutes or within the time that a clinician sees a patient, you could detect whether the patient has gonorrhea and whether the patient has resistance towards ciprofloxacin or the third generation cephalosporins, because then the clinicians could prescribe precisely what is effective for the patient instead of just guessing or prescribing without any knowledge. And so the NIH, the National Institute of Health in the US, has just awarded a prize for antimicrobial resistance to a company that has made this very rapid test. It's a molecular test. It's a rapid test to detect gonorrhea. The only thing is that the company is still working on the drug resistance part, but there are other companies that have rapid drug resistance testing as well. So hopefully that would be the test for the future. And once companies could develop that for gonorrhea, hopefully we could have that for other diseases, especially for respiratory infections, when we know that a lot of the people with respiratory infections are prescribed antibiotics just in case, right? It's a bacteria. When in fact, more than 70% of respiratory infections are because of viruses for which antibiotics are not useful, right? So if we only have a simple rapid test that could detect between to tell whether the patient has a bacterial or viral infection, that would be a big game changer. So first, the gonorrhea for STIs, the next biggest thing is to distinguish between bacterial and viral infections.
Yeah, this fight against AMR, antimicrobial resistance, is one of the very nice and important flags that Rosanna and all the team has been shaking around, because it's a major problem. In some countries, the resistance is creating super bugs. So basically, bacteria that cannot be killed, basically. Yeah. And if you are infected by one of these, you are killed, and you're going to create a problem for the whole system. So
we've already heard of COVID patients going into hospital. They were able to get over, they recover from COVID, but they die of resistant infections that they acquired in the hospital. Yeah.
So there was, Rosanna worked on a series of courses together with many other institutions. We were together in how many languages? It was in several languages.
Yes, it was in English, Spanish, Portuguese, Chinese, and Russian.
Yeah. And exactly to teach healthcare professionals, but also other people, but mainly people who are in the area, basic aspects of how to deal with this kind of situation, between how to deal with the difference between virus and bacteria, and basic knowledge that is still missing. It's still missing in many countries. So this is something that we have from time to time to recap, update, and do it again. Some countries are controlling which kind of drugs are sold to whom, but some others do not do it until today. So they can sell an antibiotic to anyone, even if it's not needed.
Yeah. So we have, as Carlos said, we started a massive open online course, which is free to anyone who has an internet, and is very user friendly. And so you could actually take the course on your phone if you like. And our first course was 6 weeks. And each week you only need 2 hours. And because it's online, you could access it whenever you have time. And you don't have to have the 2 hours continuously. You could take a step for 15 minutes, go and do something else, and another day come back and take up from where you left off. So it's very flexible, very easy to use. And it was very highly rated. So we decided during the last few months to make a follow-up to this course, to look at the impact of the pandemic on antimicrobial resistance and how we could leverage the increased testing capacity, the increase in technological advances, and also the surveillance system set up for COVID, and apply that to AMR. And so this course will be launched January 10th of next year. And it will be first available in English, and then hopefully the translations will follow. And this time it will be only 3 weeks with 2 hours each.
Yeah, but it was a good way to do. But Elias, I think the most interesting is not only this fantastic work that Rosanna has been doing, and we are more than glad to assist her, to be together. But what has always amazed me is how she is a citizen of the world. She was born in Hong Kong, right, Rosanna?
Yes.
And but she lives in Canada, but she works in London. And actually, she's found everywhere except these 3 places.
Yes, but and so you do the same too, right, Carlos?
Yeah.
And
I try to follow, but I still have a lot to learn.
Yeah, but I think honestly, the partnership with CBDL has been amazing for us, because you have access to so many industry as well as Ministry of Health and other partners that would help us in this fight, because I think the public sector cannot do it alone. And we need everyone to work together. And organizations like CBDL really help to bring everyone together. And that's the important partnership. And having these regular workshops where people know that we will keep up the momentum and keep going. And as I said, you know, in another all-day webinar I was in yesterday, you know, I think it was Winston Churchill that said, success is going from failure to failure with no less enthusiasm. And maybe that's what we've been doing. But we hope that they are not all failures.
Yeah, no, it's always success. But just as an example, Elias, this workshop that we had this week, it was with an average of 100 people per day. First day was a little bit more, the second day around 100. But for instance, what we expect is that the whole material, it is so dense, so rich in terms of content, discussion, in such a high level that it's going to be disseminated for quite a long time. So we are uploading all the videos. They are going to be available in the websites of CBDL and Aladif, also in YouTube, exactly for people to check, to discuss, because these were some very good examples that are happening in Latin America, but what has been done globally. So there was FIND, WHO, and several different organizations that shared their experience. And this is going to be a fantastic material for the years to come. Exactly. Mm-hmm. And that's what we can do. As Rosanna said, we can be waiting, sitting here and waiting for someone to do, or we can do ourselves and support everyone who is trying to do the same. And that's kind of getting together to achieve something is I think it's what we can really try to do. And it's going to be positive.
Yeah. So we also now started, since we had an industry consultation in February of this year, or last year, was it? And so with that, I think that we would like to, with what we know about COVID now, with the public being more aware, governments and donors being more aware of the critical role that diagnostics play in global health, we would like to have an initiative that allows us to seriously look at the value of diagnostics, so that we could estimate the impact, how many lives have been saved because of diagnostics. And I think the non-health sector use of diagnostics allows us to imply that it's more than just saving lives as well. It's saving economies, saving livelihoods, right? And so it's now become a very multidimensional measurement of impact for the value of diagnostics. So so I think that this will be the big partnership that we will take forward with CBDL.
Dr. Rosanna, I have the last question, because one of the most health problem in Brazil is a tropical disease. Yes. And you served in the OMS special program on research and training in tropical disease. Has Brazil, which suffers from this team, been the object of studies in this case?
Yes, Brazil is actually a very, very strong partner for the program. And one of the things that we're very encouraged about is that Brazil not only have all the expertise through the Ministries of Health and also Fiocruz, which is a very, very strong research institution, but also Brazil is one of the few examples where we have technology transfer and local production of diagnostics as a success in the making of diagnostics that would I think it started with leishmaniasis, and now with HIV and syphilis, and now it's extended, that technology is being extended to all kinds of diagnostics. So I think Brazil, in terms of being a partner for advancing neglected tropical diseases, it's one of the world's best partners in terms of research, having manufacturing expertise, solving problems of access, and also hopefully the regulatory mechanism for these neglected tropical diseases, should be an example to everyone. And with the Convergence Initiative in the Americas, Brazil has to be the leading country for that, because for other diseases, we may say, oh, everybody could look to FDA in the US, right? But the US does not have many tropical diseases, right? And so which countries can be the leading country for neglected tropical diseases for all these aspects? Brazil is one of the very few around the world that can do all of those. And so I hope that working with Anvisa, working with Fiocruz, we could solve this problem of diagnostics for neglected tropical diseases.
Okay, and I would like to thank you, Dr. Rosana Carlos Gouveia, for the impressionant talk here and joining us in this interview. I think that it's a special moment to discuss important issues regarding the disease and diagnostic tests. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot for your kind availability for us here. We do appreciate it. It's a fantastic partnership, and we are sure we have 30 years more to work together.
We hope that things would happen in our lifetime, right?
Yeah.
Thank you. So, Doutora Rosana Pires, on behalf of CBDL, Carlos Gouveia, it's a pleasure. And please, thank you very much, and ask for your final message for us, please.
Well, I think partnerships are very important for us to solve problems in global health. And I'm very, very thankful for the partnership with CBDL. And we hope that in the years to come, there'll be many successes along the way. Thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent.
Aqui, portanto, mais um exemplo, né, Carlos, né, das parcerias, né, dos engajamentos que a CBDL traz, né, pelo nível profissional, né, que essas pessoas estão envolvidas. Aqui hoje a doutora Rosana Pires, sem dúvida alguma, entrevista muito importante, uma referência mundial. Parabéns, Carlos, eu acho que cada vez mais estamos mostrando um pouquinho do que é a CBDL por dentro e por fora também, né, Carlos?
Excelente. Muito obrigado, Elias, mais uma vez, Lúcia também, e até o próximo especial Saúde e Diagnóstico.
Obrigada, Carlos.
Com certeza. CBDL, Diagnóstico para a Vida, obrigado por estar conosco e até o próximo programa. Tchau, pessoal.